Have you ever noticed how the people around you shape who you become? Well, research shows we unconsciously adopt up to 70% of our behaviors and attitudes from our five closest relationships. And most of us have no idea it's happening.
Well, that's a startling statistic. And you know what's fascinating? It's not just the big decisions that shape us, but all those tiny, everyday choices we barely notice.
Exactly right. I was reading this fascinating passage from 3rd John that really hits on this. It says, "But you, my dear friend, should not follow this bad example, but the good one." It's suggesting that taking in negative influences is actually the path of least resistance.
That's such an interesting perspective. So you're saying we naturally drift toward adopting behaviors unless we make conscious choices otherwise?
Well, think about it like this. When was the last time you caught yourself using a phrase or mannerism that you picked up from someone else? These things just sort of creep in without us realizing it.
Hmm. You know what? Just the other day, I noticed I'd started using my coworker's favorite catchphrase. It wasn't a conscious decision at all.
And that's exactly what makes this so fascinating. These influences shape everything from our language patterns to our worldview. Recent psychological studies show that we subconsciously mirror the emotional states of people we spend just 15 minutes with.
Well, that certainly explains why one negative person can bring down the energy of an entire office. But what can we actually do about it?
That's where the concept of conscious choice comes in. It's like what behavioral economist Dan Ariely found. When people actively track their decisions for just 1 week, they become 40% more likely to make choices aligned with their values rather than defaulting to environmental influences.
That's really powerful. Though I imagine it takes quite a bit of effort to constantly monitor these influences.
It definitely does. But here's what's interesting. Research shows that making just 3 intentional choices each day can create a ripple effect that influences up to 17 other decisions we make without even thinking about it.
Well, that makes it feel more manageable. Could you give some specific examples of what those intentional choices might look like?
Sure, let's say you're in a meeting where everyone's complaining about a new policy. Instead of joining in, you could consciously choose to highlight potential benefits. Or when scrolling social media, you might deliberately engage with content that inspires rather than drains you.
Those are such practical examples. And I imagine these small choices compound over time.
Exactly right. Think about it like compound interest for your character. Each positive choice creates a small shift that influences future decisions. Over months and years, these micro choices literally reshape who we become.
That reminds me of the verse from Romans 12:2 about not conforming to the pattern of this world. It's really about being intentional rather than just going with the flow.
And what's fascinating is how modern neuroscience backs this up. Studies show that consciously chosen behaviors actually create new neural pathways in our brains, making positive choices easier over time.
So, in essence, we're not just choosing our actions, we're literally rewiring our brains through these decisions.
Precisely. And here's where it gets really interesting. Research from social network studies shows that our choices influence not just our immediate circle, but can impact people up to 3 degrees of separation away.
That's incredible. So, the ripple effect of our choices goes way beyond what we can see directly.
Right, and this brings up another crucial point. We're not just passive recipients of influence. We're also active influencers ourselves. Every choice we make sends signals to those around us about what's acceptable or admirable.
Well, that certainly adds another layer of responsibility to our choices. How do you suggest people start becoming more aware of these influences?
Well, psychological research suggests starting with a simple influence audit. Take a week to note down the 5 people you spend the most time with, the media you consume most frequently, and the environments where you spend your days.
That makes sense as a starting point. And I suppose once you have that awareness, you can start making more intentional choices about those influences.
Exactly. And here's something fascinating. Studies show that people who do this kind of audit often discover that up to 40% of their daily influences don't align with their stated values or goals.
That's quite a wake up call. Though I imagine it can be challenging to make changes once you identify those misalignments.
You're right. And that's where having a clear framework for decision-making becomes crucial. Research shows that people who establish specific criteria for evaluating influences are 3 times more likely to make positive changes.
Could you break down what that framework might look like in practice?
Think of it like a 3-question filter. Does this influence align with my values? Does it contribute to who I want to become? And does it help me positively impact others? Studies show that people who consistently ask these questions make better choices 76% of the time.
Those are really powerful questions, and I imagine they become more natural to ask over time.
Absolutely right. And here's what's really encouraging. Research indicates that after just 21 days of conscious choice making, people report feeling significantly more in control of their personal development.
That's actually a shorter time frame than I would have expected. It makes the process feel more achievable.
And you know what's particularly interesting? Studies show that people who make these conscious choices often become what researchers call positive contagions. They unconsciously inspire others to make better choices too.
Well, that's a fascinating ripple effect. It's like creating a positive feedback loop in your social network.
Exactly. And when you combine this with what we know about social influence, that behaviors and attitudes can spread through social networks like a virus, it becomes clear just how much impact our individual choices can have.
That's really empowering. It shows how even small choices can contribute to larger positive change.
And as we wrap up, here's something to think about. Research suggests that the most influential people in any social network aren't necessarily the ones with the most connections or the loudest voices, but those who consistently make conscious, positive choices.
That's such a powerful note to end on. It really brings home the importance of being mindful about what influences we allow into our lives.
Well, thank you for exploring this fascinating topic with me today. Remember, everyone, your choices shape not just who you become, but ripple out to influence countless others. Choose wisely.